for everybody for coming. It is my greatest pleasure to have you be here, and also my greatest pleasure to present these students. They have great paper, and I'm literally gonna talk about, okay, in very deep detail. Actually, it's a qualitative and quantitative analysis about the stability, the correlation between the stability and China economic growth. Okay, that's an awesome topic. And Amit Farhan, he's not here yet, but the topic is about BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, and its impacts on Middle Eastern country. It's an awesome topic, quantitative and qualitative. Lucky that we do not have the projector to project their very complicated world, very complicated works, so we can, so that will be totally, dazzle us. And Emmanuel here, I called him Emmanuel. He's gonna talk about the American comparison between American FDI, foreign direct investment, and the Chinese FDI, and their impacts on the African country, okay? And he's, trust me, he's an expert on that. And Marsha, I call her Marsha, and he's an honorable guest. We are pleased and honored that she present her paper. She's a student from Cal State Long Beach, okay? And the first three are my students, but this one has honor to have the mentorship of Dr. Teresa Wright of Cal State Long Beach. So let's give them a warm welcome, and let's start with Melina, then start with Emmanuel, then start with Marsha, and hopefully Amit can come in later, otherwise that he's gonna lose his award. Okay, thank you very much.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Melanie Castillo. I'm a graduate student majoring in political science. I've conducted this research under the mentorship of Dr. Tang. So my paper is about China's political stability and its effect on its economic growth. So several literature and the research throughout the years have asserted the importance of institutional stability in the economic success of a country. By analyzing the interplay between institutional dynamics and economic conditions, this hypothesis asserts that the disruption in China's political and regulatory frameworks have significantly impacted the country's economic stability. I evaluate the ramifications of these changes on various sectors, such as technology, finance, real estate, investor confidence, and overall economic growth. Through an examination of these factors, this research aims to shed light on the correlation between institutional stability and China's ongoing economic predicament. The trajectory of China's economic success has been a focal point of global interest and analysis in the recent decades. Yet within this seemingly relentless expansion, periodic challenges and fluctuations have emerged, leading to question about the underlying causes of economic crisis within the nation. These instances of instability prompt a critical question into which elements have contributed to China's economic landscape. Factors that spark my interest in this topic are surprisingly the high number of youth unemployment and China's current leader reluctance to share data that can determine their economic current situation. Instability within the government has increased in the last decade since the current leader abruptly changes policies, positions, and rules in various sectors such as international trade. This research not only aids in understanding the dynamics of China's economy, but also offers a wider insight applicable to economic governance, policymaking, and global economic stability, benefiting various stakeholders from policymakers, investors, and also the public. So for my research, I have two hypotheses. My first hypothesis is as instability index decreases, GDP growth will increase. And my second hypothesis is as transparency in government increase, GDP will increase as well. So my dependent variable is real GDP growth from 1995 to 2018 from the Madison Project. And then I have the two independent variables, which are political instability index from 1995 to 2018 from the World Bank, which measure perception of the likelihood of political stability, with 0 corresponding to the lowest rank and 100 to the highest rank. And government transparency from 1995 to 2018, from trading economics, which indicates the perceived level of corruption on a scale from 0 being highly corrupt and 100 very clean. All of those numbers have been calculated into percentages. The methods I use in this research are time series analysis, regression, panel data analysis, and since all of the variables are quantifiable, the calculations were done through SPSS and Excel. So the results I got from my research are like, for every 1 unit increase in political instability, we can expect a decrease of 0.17% of real GDP. This means political instability has a negative correlation to GDP. Therefore, the more stable a government is, the economy will benefit. Therefore, my hypothesis number 1 is correct. As the GDP annual growth increases, political instability will decrease. And for my second hypothesis, for every 1 unit of increased government transparency, we can expect a decrease of 0.22% of real GDP. Therefore, government transparency seems to decrease economic growth in China. China's methodology proved that silence can be golden, and it can be a not transparent government motto. For its, the results differ from my hypothesis number 2, as transparency in government actually increased their GDP. For my R-square, with an R-square of 0.720, we can conclude that 72% of the variation of China's GDP growth can be interpreted by political instability and government transparency. With China's political stability R-square of 0.074, we can conclude that 7.4% can be interpreted by political stability. And with government transparency index with an R-square of 0.672, we can conclude that 67.2% of the variation of China's GDP growth can be interpreted by government transparency. We have a combined t-score that is higher than 2, therefore we can conclude that there is a relationship between all of my variables. And we have a p-value which is less than 0.001, which is less than 0.5, therefore all my variables are statistically significant. I also did a Durbin-Watson, which is a test for autocorrelation, and a regression models that the output for this correlation is 0.410, which is less than 2, therefore there is a correlation between my variables. And BIF, which is the variance inflation factor, which is a measure of the amount of multicollinear regression. These results are political stability index of 1.788, China's government transparency of 3.671, and since all of my values are below 10, there is a multicollinear relation. So the empirical analysis in this research suggests that corruption increases China's GDP. In countries in Latin America, corruption has been one of the downfalls of their economy. But in China, corruption seems to benefit the economy in the short run. In the article, Chronic Capitalism, Ming-Sin Pei explores the intricate relationship between corruption and capitalism in China. Pei argues that China's economic model is characterized by state capitalism, where the state plays a dominant role in the economy and political connections, which will influence economic outcomes. According to Pei, not merely by product of rapid economic development, but rather a systematic issue that undermines the efficiency and fairness of the market, Pei discusses how corruption in China is often intertwined with capitalism, as influential individuals and business leverage their political connections to secure advantages in the market. And this phenomenon, chronic capitalism, undermines fair competition and perpetuates inequality by granting preferential treatment to a select few. In some cases, corruption can lead to inefficiency, mislocation of resources, decrease investor confidence, and also will decrease economic growth. On the other hand, corruption may facilitate bureaucracy, enable faster decision-making, which will benefit the economy in the short term. Therefore, China's lack of government transparency can benefit their GDP in the short term. Corruption may be suitable for capitalism, but wrong for the benefit of people across the board. The formulated hypothesis, centering on the impact of institutional stability on China's economic crisis has been deeply examined through my empirical analysis. The conducted research aligns with a broader understanding of a nuanced relationship between governance, stability, and economic performance. This study supports the hypothesis by revealing the tangible correlation between political stability, government transparency index, and China's real GDP growth. The statistical analysis deployed in this research, ranging from a time series analysis to regression models, provided compelling evidence of the correlation between key variables. High R-squared values, significant T-scores, and statistical significance attest to the robustness of my findings. Emphasizing the crucial relevance of political stability, government transparency index, in influencing China's economic trajectory. Drawing from a wide array of scholarly literature, including the works of North, Wengas, Su, Wooding, Eisen, Pei, the critical role of institutional stability in a nation's economic success emerges as a recurring theme. Insights from historical perspectives, such as Great Britain's Glorious Revolution, underscores the positive correlation between stable institution and economic prosperity. Moreover, this study implication extends beyond economic analysis. It digs into broader socio-political implications of institutional stability, shedding light on its potential to spark social unrest, influence public sentiment, and impact societal well-being. The research offers insight into China's economic policies and provides valuable recommendations for policymakers. It advocates to enhance human capital, invest in education, healthcare, and improve the overall quality of life. As a potential pathway to mitigate economic crisis stemming from institutional stability across the globe. In conclusion, this research contributes significantly to understanding the institutional dynamics' profound influence on economic crisis, particularly in the context of China. It offers a comprehensive perspective that spans historical analysis, empirical studies, policy implication, fostering a deeper comprehension of the intricate relationship between institution stability and economic performance in China. The insights gleaned from this study can potentially guide policymakers, scholars, investors, and the public toward informed decisions to address institutional vulnerabilities and promote economic growth. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I want to use this opportunity to thank everybody here because your time is very, very effective and very valuable that you are present here. And at the same time, I want to thank Dr. Tan for inviting us here. My name is Oluwatosin Manuel Folowosele, and I'm Nigerian. 4 years ago, I graduated with a master's degree in economics. We have interest in most especially Africa and the Western world relationship with some of African countries. So I'm interested in the political area. So why not get another master's degree in political science? So that's why I'm here. For the past decades, we heard about relation of United States and Africa, and we heard about China in South America and in Africa. So some people say, oh, China is taking over Africa and South America, but that is what we heard. But why can't we go to the data and see maybe there is any influence in this area basically to their investment, yes or not? So that is why I just nudge to this research to see what is going on. Maybe data can prove me something right or wrong, basically to what we heard in the media. So last year, I made this topic, which is the influence of Chinese authoritarian and the American democracy on African economy and governance structure. So how can we measure that Chinese authoritarian and American democracy impact African economy and their government structure? So let's look to the FDI, which is foreign direct investment in those regions. So what year are we looking into? So let's start it from 2012 to 2021, because some of the African countries, we know that they lack of data. So we look to the 40 countries in Africa which have some robust data, and the area we are looking at those African countries do with their GDP, real GDP, and education, expenditure, education expenditure per individual, health expenditure and health expenditure by individual, capital individual. So let's look to what America and China have invested in Africa for all those past decades, which we get the data from United States Bureau of Labor because they have a robust data what United States have invested in those regions. And let's look to the China because we don't want to go to the China database because something may not be accurate. So let's go to where international level that track all those information. So we collect all those data. So when we collect all those data, okay, what is the next thing to do? Is to tenders what we need to answer in those areas. Does Chinese have influence in the Africa economy? Does they have in their culture, society, and the government structure? So after that, I love using a starter to run my regression. So we apply our model basically to the panel of data to help us in those years. So we use China FDI as one of our independent variable, and we use America FDI as one of a second independent variable to run each GDP as a dependent variable one by one to see if there is any correlation. So before we do that, let's put all those data in one place. What is correlation can we see? But what we find out that in the United States, in those 10 years, there is a correlation with education expenditure and health expenditure in the region, in Africa. But in China, we don't see that correlation. What does that tell us? It tells us that the United States invests more in so region in education and health system between those periods. And so before we run that, okay, let's see how China's FDI have contributed in that 10 years in Africa, and let's see the United States, what they have contributed in that 10 years, and let's see all those 40 countries, which is sub-Saharan Africa countries, what is their GDP in those frame years. We notice that there is no correlation there. Even in 2012, we can see a significant decline in United States investment in Africa up to date, even to the minus. But what we find out is that there is some positive area in the Chinese in 2020. When they see that United States does not invest in those areas, they make use of that opportunity to invest more in Africa than ever before, and it's growing high. So what we find out in our panel of data tell us that there is a statistically significant in education with fees, most of us know fees effect model and a random effect model. All those things have create about 90% statistically significant, which is t-value of 0.1, which is that means that's very significant. But when we see the China, we see 0.5, 0.7, which are not in education and in health. But our point is that, is there an influence in the economy and the government structure? So what we find out after the data we analyze is that there is no correlation there. There is no effect because our R-square does not prove anything. Even we have an R-square of 40%, 30% on those panel of data. So that is telling us that there is no influence. However, what we project basically to the research in the future is that if Chinese government still invest in Africa, basically to their FDI, there may be a correlation. But as today, basically to our conclusion on those information and past scholar research that we study and we read and give us a conclusion, there is no influence of Chinese FDI and United States FDI in the Africa economy and Africa's government structure. But in another side, we know that there is a military influence. But to get all those data, we don't want, it's another research on its own, which believe, but we let the data talk to himself. We don't want to assume in that area. So that is one of our topic on that area, that there is no correlation or influence of Chinese FDI and United States FDI in Africa economy and the structure based on the fact of the data we have as today. But as the time goes on, we will be building our research to see maybe in the future there may be influence. Like I said in the earlier on, if Chinese government still invest than the United States, what we see from 2012 to this moment, there may be influence. And we can see that in Niger, Burkina Faso, and even Mali. And what I also project in that research, we are not there basically to the data, we may see something happen in the future in Angola as well. So those are the areas that we have to be monitor and look into in the future, that how can we mitigate that? How can we improve that area? So to my conclusion, based on this research, there is no influence of Chinese FDI and United States FDI in the Africa economies and their government structure. Thank you. I don't know, maybe you have any question.
Thank you very much. Let's save us from the confusion of annual data, random effects, fake effects. It was a great job. Okay. We go directly to Marsha from Cal State Long Beach, and we penalize a little bit about Ahmed being late with justifiable reasons, but let's give the seat and the stage to Marsha for talking about the Ukraine war and its impact to the global food crisis. Wonderful topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. And my name is Masha. I'm from Cal State Long Beach, but my undergrad is from Moscow, Russian Presidential Academy. And today I would like to start with a small fact that nowadays in Ukraine, egg prices reached $6, while like here in California, we can buy eggs, for instance, in Walmart just for $2. And California is the fifth economy of the world, while Ukraine is facing a terrible crisis caused by Russian invasion. And I want to start with a theoretical concept of the British economist, development economist Paul Collier, and he argues that at least 1 billion people in the world, they are just deadlocked in a systemic poverty. And he revealed 4 traps of this poverty, and one of the traps is conflict. And starvation is caused by systemic poverty for sure. And globally, more than 822 million people suffer from undernourishment daily. Isn't that this bottom billion Paul Collier is talking about? And to solve this problem, the food security concept was introduced during 1994 World Summit, Food Summit. And food security was defined as all people at all times have equal physical access to food, to safe food. According to the World Bank data, food price inflation remains high in all countries. However, lower income countries always spend a higher share on food than higher income countries. And the undoubtedly main cause of food security is poverty. However, humanitarian crises such as natural disasters and wars, conflicts, they affect global food security. And I claim that Russia's war in Ukraine is a prime example of how regional Western European crisis affects prices worldwide. And I want to focus on importance of Russia and Ukraine in global agricultural export first. Together, Russia and Ukraine account for 12% of all exported calories globally, such as like staple crops, sunflower, barley, wheat, and these are the basics of global diet. It's important. So why does the Russia's war in Ukraine as a Western European conflict, like I said, deteriorate global food security significantly? Firstly, because Ukrainian land is greatly damaged from bombs, and farmers have been just leaving their land to escape the war. Secondly, it's hard to export crops nowadays because of the state of the war in Ukraine, and many cities, they remain under the constant bombardment by Russia, and it caused shortage of energy, water, and food. Also, if Ukraine will not be able to plant new crops during the spring 2024 season, so next year's harvest, they'll also be jeopardized by this war. And moreover, sanctions imposed on Russia and Belarus, they limit their capacity to export their food, and as well as the fertilizers. And abandonment of agricultural land and reduced access to it, to this land is a significant problem, and crops are being constantly damaged, particularly during the vegetation period, which is important. And food security was pretty quickly identified as a significant issue, and in the summer of 2022, the Black Sea Initiative on the safe transportation of grain from Ukrainian ports was signed. It was completed in Istanbul in July 2022 by Turkey, Russia, Ukraine, and the United Nations. And the agreement aimed at giving guarantees for safe export corridor of Ukrainian grain. And in exchange, the other parties have to remove sanctions from Russia, their barriers to export Russian foods and fertilizers into European ports. And back then, UN Under-Secretary General on Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffith, he said that Black Sea Initiative shows that agreement on the Black Sea can be reached through humanitarian diplomacy. However, like we see, the grain deal was not renewed after its third term, and it expired in July 2023. And President Zelensky, right after that, he said that definitely Russia threatened global food security. Then it attacked Ukrainian ports in Odessa, Yuzhny, Ilishevsk. And nowadays, I claim that despite Russia's withdrawal from the deal, it remains a political lever for Russia. And cooperation on the Black Sea may become one of the bedrocks of the peace accord in the future between Ukraine, Russia, and third party. Unfortunately, there still will be risks for food safety in Ukraine. And nowadays, Ukrainian food security response program was introduced. And generally, there are three risks related to Ukraine. Firstly, it's food and agriculture market risks. Secondly, macroeconomic downturn. And thirdly, humanitarian crisis. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization is monitoring the situation, and this rapid response plan for Ukraine was introduced, and it seeks $115 million to assist the rural population in Ukraine to deal with the crisis. And this response plan actually is the largest action aimed to restore food systems and tackle food insecurity in Ukraine and in the whole region. So we see that the war in Ukraine has directly threatened Ukrainian farmers, but it also has far-reaching consequences affecting countries on the other side of the planet, because they are dependent on Russian-Ukraine grain imports. Because to meet their consumption demands, a huge number of countries, including least developed countries in Africa, import fertilizers and foodstuff from Russia and Ukraine both. And most of them rely on Russian and Ukrainian wheat for as much as 50% of their consumptions. For instance, Congo and Madagascar rely on Russia's wheat as much as 65%, and some cases are extreme with a 100% share of Russian wheat imports in Benin, for instance. And the war in Ukraine affects the price of bread by more than 50%. Egypt is now greatly suffering from it. And it means higher crops prices, and which will result in higher meat prices and animal feed prices. Sanctions imposed on Russia and Belarus also increased the price of fertilizers, such as potash and ammonia, as data shows, since a lot of countries do not produce fertilizers on their own, and they rely on global food supply chain. The UN Price Index estimated that food prices are generally 8% higher in January 2022 than they were in 2021, and 39% higher than in 2020. Data shows that global food insecurity dramatically increased during the pandemics and world economic crisis caused by COVID-19, and now it's additionally jeopardized by Russian war in Ukraine. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization presents their scenarios for current global undernourishment with two outcomes: moderate outcome and the severe outcome. Within the moderate outcome, plus 7.6 million people will also severe and suffer from the conflict in Ukraine. And under the severe outcome, it will be plus 13 million people undernourished. The most at-risk regions nowadays are Asia-Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa, Near East, North Africa, and Latin America. It's important to mention that this scenario was updated in March 2022 before the Hamas attack on Israel, which dramatically worsened a humanitarian crisis in Near East. And here, the importance of the Green Deal becomes crystal clear for those people in these regions, Africa, Near East, Caribbean, and Latin America. And I claim that the Green Deal may be used as a political bargaining, which reflects the interest of both sides of the war in Ukraine. And then I look to the official rhetorics of political leaders, and what do they say about the Green Deal as a war instrument? On July 13, 2023, just a couple of days before the Green Deal was expired, President Putin, he gave a comment about the Green Deal future. And Putin, he complained that Western partners, they do not comply with Russia's conditions. And he said that this deal was justified by the United Nations, aimed mainly at helping world poorest countries to prevent famine. The increase in prices for food and fertilizers is not related to a special military operation, it's his name of the war in Ukraine, but instead this food went to the richest European countries, not to the poorest countries. And next, I looked into the President Zelensky's speech, and the same date of this Putin comment, Zelensky held a press conference during the NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, and he said that Green Deal will definitely expire soon, and it's necessary that Mr. Antonio Guterres should work on this issue and have agreements with the Russian side. On the official Ukrainian YouTube channel, Freedom Live, which broadcasts Zelensky's speech, the president stressed that this is a story about the survival of the world, hunger, social chaos, which may be due to non-delivery of agricultural products. And right after the Green Deal expired on July 17, 2023, Russian Federation hosted Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg. And according to the data of the Institute for the Study of War, President Putin promised free grain supplies, relief debts, and recalled the Russian aid to Africa, such as weapons and equipment. And the African delegation during the summer in St. Petersburg, they directly stated that they were not attending the summit to just ask for the free grain, and instead they would like the Black Sea Initiative to be implemented and it to be open to the world market. So what can we do to ensure food security in Ukraine? I think that several measures can be taken to ensure food security in Ukraine, including promoting agricultural development by investing in modern technologies and infrastructure, supporting small-scale farmers for financial assistance and training programs, and diversifying agricultural production. It's also important to improve irrigation system, build storage facilities, strengthen market linkages, enhance agricultural education in the country, and develop a comprehensive food safety system, and to establish contingency plans and collaborate with international organizations such as World and Agriculture Organization, which is UN agency. And like we have seen that they have already developed the response plan, how to tackle this food security in Ukraine and in the region and worldwide. But of course, much depends on the further development of a military conflict. If Ukraine plans a second counteroffensive this spring, then crops will suffer again as attacks from Russia will follow. And the war in Ukraine has already caused risks in the developing world affecting this bottom billion. Like Paul Collier, he suggested that to tackle bottom billion problem, we should implement a combination of economic and political policies. And overall, Collier's approach to tackle the problem involves the combination of aid, military intervention, trade policies, resource management, investment, and government reforms. And this comprehensive approach aims to address the underlying systemic issues that perpetuate poverty and marginalization in these countries. And concerning Ukraine, the most optimal options are assistance from national states and international organizations, investment in the economy, trade policy with moderate protectionism for Ukraine, as well as the resource management. And at the moment, like we see, the prospects of the Green Deal, they are unknown. Even though it has now been terminated, I'm sure that in the future, it can be resumed and will become one of the levers in the course of peace negotiations between Russia, Ukraine, and third parties. Solving the problem in Ukraine will help restore global supplies, food and fertilizers, foodstuff, which will make food more affordable in low-income countries. And there is still a hope that food insecurity caused by the Russian war in Ukraine will be short-term and temporary. However, food insecurity existed long before the war, and it's chronic for many countries because globalization makes low-income countries extremely vulnerable, especially in terms of food security. And Paul Collier identified the bottom billion countries as a deadlock system. And if we will take a look at food security, it reproduces poverty, because poverty leads to undernourishment, which means poor physical and poor cognitive development. And it results in low productivity, which further maintain this poverty. And to get at this crisis, external help and comprehensive work are needed. And as we hope that each war, each conflict comes to its end, like the war in Ukraine, this speech also does. And I want to finish my speech with a quote from OECD, that poverty encompasses different dimensions of deprivations that relate to human capabilities, including consumption and food security, health, education, rights, voice, security, dignity, and decent work. Thank you.
Great paper, and thanks for mentorship from Dr. Royce from South Long Beach to make this presentation, great paper presentation possible. Even though I'm not a mentor, I read her paper, every one of the papers. Her paper is really outstanding. Trust me, and take my word for it. Really appreciate that. Oh, by the way, if any of the guests approach me to ask for a copy of paper, do I have you guys' permission?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then the next, not least, we have welcomed Ahmed Farhan, also one of my friends. Ahmed
Farzan.
Farzan. Because the English student, so I could coordinate anything else. I really appreciate that he coming over here, and his paper is about BRI and its impact on
The
Middle Eastern
Belt and Road Initiative by China.
BRI, we should.
Yeah.
This economy is we have a problem always use the acronym Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah.
BRI. Okay. I apologize for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I promise I will first introduce any acronym I use. My name is Omid Farzan. I'm currently studying a master's degree in political science here at CSU Fullerton. And in terms of my background, from 2008 to 2011, I served active duty in the Army. I was a communications sergeant for a mechanized infantry company in Fort Hood, Texas. After an honorable discharge, I started my undergraduate studies at UC Davis. I studied Middle East and South Asian studies. That was my major. I also had a minor in East Asian studies. And then I got accepted here at CSU Fullerton. My area of study is China and the Middle East, well, specifically China's impact on the Middle East and how China is currently interacting with the Middle East. And that's what I did my research on, is to look at specifically the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, and how it impacted, if at all, the Human Development Index of countries in the Middle East. And I'm going to go over what I found. So the Human Development Index, or HDI, it has three factors that go into it. First, the Human Development Index, it's a number between 0 and 1 that is assigned to countries, and it's based on three indicators. One is life expectancy at birth. The second one is expected years of schooling. And the third one is gross national income. And so any policy or development that can affect one of these three indicators will also affect the Human Development Index of a country. And so China began the Belt and Road Initiative. It was an initiative launched by President Xi Jinping in 2013. And almost every country in the Middle East has joined the Belt and Road Initiative. And even when looking at the countries that haven't officially joined the Belt and Road Initiative, like Israel and Jordan, China has still invested in those countries through the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, for the background, we have to look at the increasing globalization that is happening in the world in the 21st century, and one of the things that our textbook in our class talked about is, I quote, post-colonial states are weak states that are not attractive sites for foreign investment. This is my textbook by an author, Karamani. But those post-colonial weak states are exactly who have been targeted by the Belt and Road Initiative. And so every as Emmanuel mentioned, China has invested in Africa, and almost every single country in Africa is a partner in the Belt and Road Initiative. The only exception is Eswatini. And in the Middle East, we have a similar situation with most countries joining the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, different scholars have had different opinions about the impact of the Belt and Road Initiative. The Lowy Institute, which is an independent think tank based in Sydney, Australia, has characterized the Belt and Road Initiative as colonialism with Chinese characteristics, but there are also some scholars who take a different approach. For example, Professor Brodingham, she and also Needham have said that the accusations made of the Belt and Road Initiative are exaggerated or untrue. And regarding the Human Development Index, like I mentioned, it's 3 different indicators: life expectancy at birth, expected years of schooling, and gross national income. And so I looked at Chinese investments in the Middle East that would impact one of those 3 things. One of the things that can impact it is investment in the energy sector, which according to the Foreign Affairs Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee of the United States, 46% of China's investment in the Middle East is the energy sector. The projects include building power plants in Iraq and Jordan, and potentially Lebanon as well. And so these power plants can, obviously provide electricity, and that can impact the country's Human Development Index because, with increased power generation, you can avoid blackouts, which is something that can occur regularly in countries like Lebanon. There's also the investment in expanding gas fields, which is taking place in Iraq and Qatar. And, expanding gas fields increases the supply of fuels for the power plants. And we also see Chinese investment in refineries in Saudi Arabia, oil refineries. And in addition to energy investments, I also looked at security partnerships with different countries in the Middle East. For example, Saudi Arabia has been a recipient of ballistic missile technology, right? So it's not simply China selling ballistic missiles to Saudi Arabia, but also selling the technology itself so that Saudi Arabia will be able to produce their own ballistic missiles. And China is also conducting military exercises with Egypt and Iran. They're conducting joint naval exercises with Iran in the Gulf of Oman. And the goal, the stated goal of these naval operations is anti-piracy. And piracy is something that can affect a country's GDP. So it can affect their Human Development Index as well. And in addition to security and energy investment, we also see China involved in diplomatic efforts. We had Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince and de facto leader of Saudi Arabia. A few years back, he he called for for the Middle East to become the new Europe, focusing on increased interconnectivity between countries in the Middle East. And China is taking a role in that vision of Mohammed bin Salman by having a forum, the China Arab States Cooperation Forum, which I believe it was in 2022 that they had their first summit in Riyadh. And this China Arab States Cooperation Forum is China inviting countries in the Middle East, specifically the Arab countries, to invest in trade with China. Besides the Arab countries, China is also involved in diplomatic efforts with the country of Iran. We saw last year the peace treaty signed by Saudi Arabia and Iran. They established diplomatic relations with each other, and that establishment of diplomatic relations, it took place in Beijing with Saudi and Iranian representatives being hosted by China in Beijing. And so these kinds of diplomatic agreements can potentially improve the Human Development Index of the countries by reducing tensions and potential, terrorist attacks or violence that can happen in those countries. In addition to this, we have China being repeatedly on the international stage calling for the end of economic sanctions against Iran and Syria. And in addition to these oral statements of condemning sanctions on these two countries, they also provide back channels to evade the sanctions as well. And another sector that China invests in is the education sector, which also takes place in Iraq. We have Chinese companies building 1,000 new schools in Iraq. Let's see, 4 years ago. We also see the rise of Confucius Institutes in the Middle East. If you don't know, Confucius Institutes are ways in which China establishes cultural relations with other countries. These Confucius Institutes, they're places of education where students can study Chinese language, culture, and also potentially earn scholarships to go study in China. And we see these educational institutions being built in Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and also a few other countries in the Middle East. And so the idea behind these educational institutes in regards to the Human Development Index is that they will increase expected years of schooling, so they can impact the Human Development Index through that. I also looked at economic and trade ties specifically. There was the China Arab States Expo, which was hosted in China, where different companies in the Middle East traveled to China through their representatives, and they showcased their products for export to China. So this is in addition to primarily the petroleum or oil that China is importing from the Middle East, right? Saudi Arabia is one of the main countries that China imports oil from, but China is looking to diversify, and that's why, China is looking to import food products or other items from the Middle East, and this China Arab States Expo was exactly showcasing that. And then in regards to war and conflict, President Xi Jinping, in 2018, he announced a $20 billion special loan for economic reconstruction. And the countries targeted were Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon, all countries that have faced either damage by war or economic sanctions by the United States and other countries. And specifically in Syria, as you all probably know, there's the Syrian civil war that is still ongoing. It's been going on for over a decade. A lot of buildings and infrastructure has been damaged, and China is offering to help rebuild the country. And then another final thing I looked at is also ports, specifically naval ports for trade. And in terms of ports, China has invested in Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Israel, Iran, and Egypt, where all of these ports have received Chinese development, management, or investment. And so, increased connectivity at a port means more options for trade, and the trade can impact the country's human development index. So that's the background for the research, and then the actual research itself is I looked at 7 countries. I couldn't look at all of them because, like I said, not all of them joined the Belt and Road Initiative. So I looked at the seven different countries: Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar. I looked at the Human Development Index data for these 7 countries from 2010 to 2021. And so I looked at the year they joined the Belt and Road Initiative, and I compared the Human Development Index score that they received each year, because it's updated annually. I looked at what their Human Development Index score was before they joined the Belt and Road Initiative, and then also after they joined. And I compared whether it went up, whether it went down. And then I also looked at the growth rates as well and see how much their Human Development Index grew or shrank year on year, and compared it with before and after they joined the Belt and Road Initiative. And I also compared the growth with the world's average Human Development Index, just to see, are they doing better than the world average or worse? And so the HDI, like I mentioned, is published yearly. It's compiled by the United Nations Development Program. And so I tested 2 hypotheses. My first hypothesis was that countries in the Middle East have seen an improvement in their HDI since joining the Belt and Road Initiative. And then the second one is that their HDI growth rates have increased since joining the Belt and Road Initiative. And so basically, the other factor to consider was the coronavirus pandemic, which from 2019 to 2020, for those 2 years, the global HDI growth rates declined. In fact, in some countries, it declined in the raw amount. But basically, my conclusion is that my first hypothesis was shown to be true, with the exception of Lebanon. Lebanon was the only country that actually saw an HDI decrease after joining the Belt and Road Initiative. And then my second hypothesis was shown to be wrong, with again, the partial exception of Lebanon and the total exception of Qatar. So it was only Qatar that saw an increase in their HDI growth rate after joining the Belt and Road Initiative.
Okay, sorry to stop it.
No, it's okay.
About 10 minutes Q&A. We can start right now, and then after that, get that into our next schedule. Okay, any question answered, and you're welcome to direct any of them. And thanks.
Yes.
First of all, my name is Scott Spencer. I'm a professor of political science at Cal State Fullerton. So I have a question for you. Just briefly, what was China's hope when it inaugurated this Belt and Road Initiative in terms of what was it trying to achieve politically, less so economically, maybe economically as well, but just generally, what was it trying to achieve in after looking at the data for the Middle East, do you think, despite the fact that Qatar was the only one where you find strong findings, was there any kind of political shift in the Middle East sort of towards China, away from maybe the Soviet, Russia, or the United States?
Yeah, so regarding the Belt and Road Initiative, right, a little bit on the background is that it was actually President Hu Jintao, right, Xi Jinping's predecessor, who came up with this go out policy, which was this idea that China should focus on diversifying its exports, not just to the United States, which was its primary partner, and it continues to be its primary partner, but they wanted to also have Chinese exports to other countries and also establish better, improved, trade ties with other countries as well. And so the Belt and Road Initiative, I would say, the goal is diversification, and not just diversification in terms of countries that they want to trade with, but also diversification of trade routes specifically. There are two major choke points for China. There is the Strait of Malacca, which is by Singapore on the border between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And then we also have the Strait of Hormuz, which is in the Persian Gulf. Now, the vast majority of the world's oil exports from the Middle East go through the Strait of Hormuz, so that's a critical place. The United States has the naval Fifth Fleet there guarding it, and in terms of the Strait of Malacca, there's also U.S. Navy presence there as well. And so China is looking for a way to counter the United States in kind of preempting, should the United States take an action to close one or both of those straits, China will be able to have land routes through Asia, right, through Central Asia and the Middle East, to be able to have trade security with the countries in the Middle East. And the other thing was, you mentioned, politically in the Middle East, what has changed? And from what I've seen in my research, we have seen a significant shift, for example, in the Iranian government and improving their relations with China. Just in terms of, for example, education, the University of Tehran announced that they're starting an East Asian studies major, right, just last year. And they're hosting Chinese academics and politicians at the university to come and talk. And we see, Iranian politicians having a much more positive outlook towards China. There are other countries too, but I focus primarily on Iran in that regard.
For Emmanuel, you talked about the relationship between foreign direct investment and education. To what extent do we know that the relationship is the reverse? That as a country in Africa becomes more highly educated, they make more connection and then bring in more foreign direct investment. So in a sense, there's the push model of the money coming in, creating education. But what extent do we think of the reverse happening? The higher education levels leading to better connections, leading to a pull to bring investors in to the country. So can you talk about which of those is bigger here, the push or the pull?
I think, thank you for that question. Basically, Paul raised in Nigeria, which I have the opportunity of education there to understand the deep knowledge of that area, is that to answer your question, we require something called brain drain. In the long run, it's good, but how many percent of the people comes back for that investment? So those are the questions we have to ask. Like me, automatically I'm going back to share my knowledge with other people. But to the scale, it's very limited because those people move out of the country. Let's see what happened last year, even early this year. We see increase of a medical doctor leaving Nigeria because when it compared to the dollar power to the Nigeria currency, the same knowledge, the same training, and somebody pay like $500,000 a year, and I'm in Nigeria, they're giving $50,000. I want to get out. So but in terms of remit of sending money back home, that is impact the economy in the long run. But what I've seen is that if we Chinese continue to invest, there may be in that area. But United States in education and health, which is helping Africa for the long run, but we have to see, are those people coming back to invest home? Those are another data we have to look into. But for the Chinese area, we have not seen anything significant in that area. But what also we found is that there is an improvement in technology explosion between that year compared to other year. So to answer your question, yes, in the long run it may happen if those people come back home. But we have to see the currency exchange rate before we make that conclusion. So that will also help us to understand, is that working? So I may say, yes, it may be, and no, it may not, if we might get a level of a brain drain. And if the United States, oh, you study here, kick you out, but it's not possible. Everybody needs that the best to benefit themselves. So thank you for asking that question. I hope I answered your question.
Ms. Castillo, I really enjoyed your presentation. But my question for you is, what is the big difference that makes for China's corruption to benefit their citizens economically, while in the Latin countries, let's say in Mexico, the cartels only benefits if you're part of the cartel, but they destroy and sink into even deeper levels of poverty the towns that they take over. So did you find in your research what is the big difference between the two situations?
Thank you for your question. I think that was one of the points that I was analyzing while going with this research. I think corruption in China, they used to make their government richer and try to build an image that's good for the people on top, not their citizens. But their citizens believe that there's no corruption in their country because they try to have a hard image. While in cases of countries like Latin America, like Mexico, or the country I'm from, Ecuador, people know that their government's corrupt, and instead of them helping boost the economy of the government, they focus on filling up their pockets and creating a government that's not even good for their country, or try to present an image. It's just they just take that money and put it in their own bank accounts per se. So corruption in China, like I think in the effect that I'm analyzing here, it's in the short term how they use corruption in order to facilitate bureaucracy and enable faster decision making, which it will only benefit in the short run. I hope that answered your question.
Do we have one more question over here?
I have a question for Rhoda. When we're talking about the food stuff, I'm just curious, I haven't followed the weather. This doesn't really reflect that much on China, but as far as the crops being destroyed, particularly the 2024 crops that have not yet arisen, are these crops being destroyed by Russia purposely, or just as a side effect of war now?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that it can be done by Russia purposely, but in my paper, I traced the UN Food and Agricultural Organization Food Prices Index, and they show that during the crisis, then the crisis began, the war in Ukraine, this index of food prices rose from 125 to 145 points in 2022. And I have data about the specific crops like wheat, sunflower, and it shows that the majority of countries in Africa, they are dependent on Russian crops. And but land in Ukraine is greatly suffered by bombardment. It means that there will be no harvest next season. And now the vegetation season is going on, but because of the active military actions, unfortunately, that is jeopardized. So we will not have food from Ukraine because it's jeopardized by the war, and we will not have food from Russia because it's impossible to import because of the sanctions imposed on Russia. And also I looked into the fertilizers, and like Russia and Belarus, they both export potash and ammonia, which are the main fertilizers, and it shows that they are like the predominant exporters of these fertilizers. If countries will not have these fertilizers, unfortunately, because they don't produce that on their own, they will not be able to grow their food in Africa.
What's that also a plan? What are they going to do if the 2024 crops did not manifest themselves?
Yeah, I talked about the response plan in Ukraine, right? And they say like not every part of Ukraine is suffering from the war. Technically, nowadays, it's a Donbas region, this region. But Ukraine has its western regions, which are also like prolific for the growing of crops. So there are different regions. Partially, it suffered, but of course, they will do it, but in part. So another part is greatly suffered, and we will not have these crops. And because of that, I looked into this moderate and severe scenario of how many people will starve, yes? And it was plus 7.6 million within the moderate scenario, and plus 13 million people within the within the like complicated scenario, most severe scenario. And it shows that only this region, like Donbas region, which is affected by war, and Russian regions, which are not able to export together, they will affect this crisis specifically. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question.
Great.